Hi, welcome to the Breakneck Podcast, where Ian and I, two founders of early stage companies, talk about what it's like to build, sell, market in an age where technology changes weekly. Oh, that's kind of every week we show up and I feel like, a tick of the clock has elapsed. And every week it's different. Every week I'm always shocked by the changes in how people think, not just technologies, but how people have adopted those technologies and are thinking about adopting those technologies, which I think are as biggest topic for me as actual technologies. Is like things that used to be very hard to sell are very easy. Things that are hard to build are easy. And Ian, you had an experience this week with a couple CEOs and a couple deals that you're working on. And without naming names, what were your observations about how CEOs of the small kind of technology companies that you might sell to are thinking about things?
Yeah, let's. I actually want to go deep on this, but let's maybe start with sentiment, because just before we started this, you and I did a little bit of a sort of sentiment check, and both of us pretty damn optimistic this week.
Yeah, we had a good week. We had a good week last week ourselves.
Yeah,
And what I was saying is I feel like I've improved our product. And by I mean my team obviously is doing all the work and most of the thinking, all the strategy. Our product's better, but that's not what changed. What changed was people who viewed what we were doing a year ago as overly complicated and hard and like risky and weird are now, when we say, hey, it's agents. We're just going to put this agent in your company. It's going to go do work for you. They're excited about it. And from the CEO level down, people are saying like, this is something we need to adopt. And so deals closed very quickly, and several of them that I didn't expect to close. And it was just that level of excitement about trying something new was just not there a year ago and has completely turned around in the last 3 or 4 months. I don't know why. I think it's education, but they're hearing the podcasts or something, and it's definitely changed.
yeah. I think I said this a while ago. I've never been in a hype cycle where the purchaser has been educated. I wouldn't say so well, but so often by the general media and the general conversation that is going on. So that makes it really, really helpful when you have the conversation. Last week, I had a couple of different conversations with executives in sort of $10 to $20 million revenue size businesses. And one conversation I had on Friday really struck me. This particular CEO, I know them, and so we're having a conversation. They were asking me, look, I know I need to be doing more on AI. Can we have a conversation? You're in the depths of it. So the first level of questioning was like, where do I even start? And so I'll relay back a little bit of the guidance I gave, and Matt will see if you would agree with this. I think there's kind of two paths. The first path, which is the easiest one, is as individuals within the business, look at your job. Is there anything quickly you can do? And so this business, copywriting is part of the business. They'd already gone, well, of course, we can just chat GPT this and do the copyright. So I think the easiest thing, first of all, just look across the business, culturally create the environment for your folks to question their jobs and go out and see what tools there are basically for them to drive their own individual efficiency. The other path to chase down is the bigger, slightly more challenging one, which is, maybe I'll give an example of this. So this business has a department that spends about $500,000 doing a particular thing. And I kind of had an understanding of that. So I presented something like that we do already. I said, look, we could do this for you. And look, that would change a lot of stuff for you. And it was really interesting. This particular CEO, their face dropped because they said, well, this is a big structural change. I have 5 people doing this. And so it's challenging to make those kind of workflow level, process department level changes. And so this is a woman, so she looked at it and said, oh my God, I could save all of this money, but culturally I'm going to have to change a bunch of things. And even as we got into it, I was showing just a small slice of it. I knew that this was a small slice we're going to change, but actually structurally for the business, they could change all of this stuff to get real advantage from it. And so you could see her trying to process all of this in real time. And we went through a couple of different, there was as I like to call them, there was a $500,000 problem, there was a $300,000 problem, and so she had to kind of work her way through that. And then as she came back up for air, she's like, I don't really know where to start with this. And the guidance that I gave is, there's really two opportunities when you look across your business and you're going to re-architect a workflow with AI. There's cost opportunity and then there's maybe growth opportunity. And I think probably the easier place to start is cost, in the sense of you have a process, you know what it is. As we experience, as I experienced, she looked at this straight away and got it, and she was like, "Oh my goodness, okay, I could change a bunch of stuff." I think that's probably the easier place to start. Don't know what you're seeing, Matt.
Yeah, anytime you have to ask someone to fire their team, that's bad. I would say like the worst is the team is going to have to adopt a whole bunch of new practices. That's a very hard sell. Fire the team is actually better because that's something that the executive buyer can do. Now I'm saying that like a Machiavellian, like, oh yeah, you can just fire your whole team. And it's not where you want to be, is getting a perception of your product is like, you're all gonna get fired if it's adopted in your company. I think the best one is when you engage a company and say, we're going to reduce all of your, we're going to get rid of all of your blockers for growth because you have a few hires you need to make. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring them in and we're going to transform how your team works so that 90% is now done by AI. The remaining team are going to do huge value added work on top of where they're doing. Like those would be my three stages. What agents have done is they've completely eliminated the need to do the bottom one, which is instead of saying everybody on your team is going to have to change how they work before you can get value, what you can say is, I'm going to eliminate the need for people and I'm going to come in and deliver a whole value chain that comes from you down with an agent. And so, when you like, oh shit, I might have to fire my whole team. That's real. But I think the thing that's great about it is it doesn't require that team's buy-in or doesn't require any risk from that team adopting the product before you can get value. I think that's the thing to focus on, because you can come in and say, hey, we're just going to, instead of those 5 hires you have to make next year, you're going to come and use this product. And in the long run, I think all the people in the business, it's not like they were trained at Juilliard to do that job for 15 years and that's the only thing they can do. That's what they happen to do because that's a critical need for the company now. And I think if we can just help people see that once a whole bunch of things blocking the business go away, well, there's going to be a whole other group of things that need to be done. And hopefully those people can, through the process of adoption or maybe even by interacting with the agents, find new, even more valuable work within the company. But that's my thoughts.
Think so. This business is in the fashion space, actually. And so I mention that because there's an element of creativity, of craftsmanship, of differentiation, of sort of artistic value in the products that you're purchasing. So, this particular business, as you look at it, there's a bunch of work that isn't creative, isn't artistic, there isn't craftsmanship. It's not what differentiates the business at all. So I think that more generally, this is a slightly different observation, but I think, I've been thinking particularly over the weekend as, software developers, junior software developers, harder for them to get jobs. That's across multiple job types is happening. But what is not happening is that craftsmanship is not disappearing. We've been talking about creativity for a couple of weeks, and I think now I realize that what was bugging me about that was I needed to understand, as we talked about, if AI can be creative, the answer so far is not. So what does that mean for us as humans and in work? The thing that really differentiates the products we like and we enjoy is craftsmanship in terms of attention to detail. We understand that Matt likes that particular material in his black shirt, for example, and there's a trend around that. And I think that stuff will remain. So back to the business we were just talking about, we weren't talking about changing, for the most part, weren't talking about changing culturally what that business valued. We were really talking about what was the talacha? Is that the term you have?
Yeah. And I think talacha for new listeners is a kind of simple, repetitive work that most people find ends up occupying a lot of the work. I still do talacha. I like doing my payroll myself and going over the details. Does not require a CEO to do it, but A, I don't have to pay someone to do it. And B, I kind of like just something click, 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 click. I think the bigger point is not just eliminating repetitive work. I think that's obviously like where AI can go in and save you many, many hours of payroll each week very quickly. But when I talk to customers, it's just like, you're a security company. You know what everybody at your company should be passionate about? Security. You should have people, and I've been at companies like this, they come into work And they are excited about not just your product, but security in general. Or if you're in a construction company, you know what you should hire people who are passionate about? Buildings and like materials and, craft. The problem is most companies, by maintaining all that talacha, have to create all these tiers, not just of management and hierarchy, but tiers of how much they actually give a shit about your company and what it does at all. And it's like, if you're somebody working at, I don't know, I'm in Austin, so Dell's a gigantic company. There's probably people who are extremely excited about computing and personal computing and like how customers are adopting Dell servers and Dell, then there's a whole bunch of people who just show up for a paycheck. And like when you're hiring maybe 50, 80% of your company who just doesn't even really need to understand what your company does whatsoever, that's a really weird way to run a firm. And I think it causes a lot of the stress within companies and a lot of the lack of esprit de corps. And if you had 100 people, and instead of growing to 500, you could keep that 100 people who are passionate and maybe make, some swaps so that everybody was passionate and everybody was excited about your brand and everybody could contribute to your culture versus having to have these people who just don't even care. And then you have to create management structures and department structures just to separate the passionate people from the people who are just there for the talacha.
It's really interesting. The guidance that I gave, just to reiterate it, was start with the cost stuff because you kind of understand that and you're like, okay, like for like. The reason I didn't suggest growth stuff is because there's a lot of learning required in the growth stuff. It's like, oh, how would that work? Because you're doing something that you probably haven't done before for whatever reason, hasn't been cost effective. You haven't had the people, whatever it is. But that's where the exciting stuff is. That's the, like, to your point, if you're here because you enjoy watching people use the latest laptop, you're consumer focused. You're like, what can I do for the customer? And that's where the growth happens. So I wonder, are we going to see in the next 24 months a cycle now over the next 12 months, which is a little bit more cost focused and not quite as exciting. And then as people, like, part of the challenges there, you and I live and breathe this AI stuff, right? But if you're busy running a business, you don't have time to, unless hopefully you're listening to us to learn a little bit, right? But you don't have time to get up to speed on this stuff. So there is a requirement to become a learning type of a company. And the best place I think to learn right now is use it in areas that you understand really well. And then in 6 months' time, you're like, wow, I get this stuff now. We could use it over here. And we could actually differentiate ourselves further from our competitors.
Well, yeah, and I think like they go together. Well, obviously, cost is super tangible. Cost is money out the door. You literally see when you're clicking send on your payment system, you see that money go from your account to not in your account, right? And it's very tangible. It's very easy to see exactly how. And so you can reduce that cost is something that can happen in a month. And I think the AI sale, it's just, you're going to have to go pay this. Let me show you a demo that's going to motivate that 90% plus of what you used to have to pay that person for can go away. All I have to do is convince you that with your team, your systems in place, and this AI, you're not going to have to make that hire or that 2 or 3 extra hires. And that's that's going to be the first low-hanging fruit because it's so tangible. In general, companies that become very financialized, like the CFO makes more decisions than the CEO, and the CEO is like a former CFO or former head of revenue, they become very numbers driven. And those number driven tend to emphasize cost cutting or revenue at all costs or acquisitions at all costs. The companies that have done the very best over the last 30 years, though, are a lot of founder-led companies like Steve Jobs or Google or Amazon, where you have these extremely value-centric early employees or founders as the CEO. And it's because like the average bean counter who's brought in, no offense, actually that's an offensive term that I mean offensively. They don't think about value creation in the same way. They know revenue comes in, but they're not thinking about this intangible concept. And if you can move more of your employees from focus on cost and focus on just the raw work that's necessary by adopting AI agents, ironically, you're going to have way more people who understand the trends in your industry. If it's fashion, I couldn't tell you how to make money in fashion. I could tell you how to save money in fashion. I would love to. That'd be a great job for me. That's why you should never hire me as a CEO of a fashion company. No, I'm limiting. This is a career limiting move here. I just recorded because I don't know how to conceptualize these value chains. And now in my business, I believe I have like these big visions of all the value that can be captured. And again, the more your culture talks about value creation, the more it's going to grow. But that's just even more reason to stop running your company in a way that has to focus on costs and just the sheer amount of work that's necessary. And I think that's going to be a shift in firms to creativity, is like your point.
Yeah, that's super interesting, isn't it? Because how do we value operational expertise today versus in a year's time, 2 years? Operational expertise probably we will devalue because more of it will be automated.
I think also once you shift to using agents, you're also implicitly shifting to be much more services friendly.
Why so?
Once you realize that you have a problem that can be offloaded to an agent, it's a very small shift to shift it to an agent that happens to be a human, that happens to not be part of your company, right? Um, I've met a lot of people, and there's these various levels of materialism in executives. There's some who like there to be a building, and that building to contain people, and those people to all have like a polo with the name of the company on it, and they get there at a certain time and they leave at a certain time, and they understand, and it's very tangible, right? Those people tend to be able to grow things very quickly because they know I want 2 boxes, I want 3 boxes of people, and that's how they think about their business. And so I've sold to a lot of those people in my previous work as a services salesperson. Essentially, they don't like the fact that they're going to have fewer people in their company, even though it might be more effective. There's this inbuilt resistance, and a lot of times we would break through with a new customer who had never used services before. And in my old business, we were taking software engineers, instead of you hiring them, putting them on site in your building, you're going to work with them, and they're going to be in a remote location and doing whatever. It might be in a different time zone, different hemisphere, and you're just going to get a result. You're not going to have those people that you can look at. And so you're going to have to just trust that you're going to send money out the door, and whatever you get back is going to be worth as much, versus knowing that if you paid those people, they're going to at least sit in your office, which you view as value. And so you would see these transformations in how people think, where suddenly they would use a remote team and they would realize that that thing that used to take them a year was done in 2 months because they had hired the wrong people, the wrong incentives, the wrong focus. And now that got done. And they would just immediately, their eyes would light up, both in person and metaphorically. And then they would start expanding their use of outside services. I think that is going to be a consistent process that happens to people, is that once they realize they can give it to AI, they can also give it to an outside firm. That this isn't my job, isn't work that has to happen. I just care that there's some outcome that can be achieved. And once you get comfortable starting to give more and more outcomes to an agent, agents, companies run by agents, companies run with humans and agents, or pure human beings as outsourcing, it all becomes so much more flexible and easy. Anyway, I do think there's a major wave of business structure transformation that's possible here as well, because you have a lot more just kind of intercalcated companies and not just these boxes with every single employee inside and then no outside.
Yeah, I wonder, are we also going to see a higher level of service, which sounds like a silly thing to say, but our expectation as humans interacting with computers is not very high, right? I know it's rising because of AI, but if you go out there, and there's various conversations right now in the voice space around like, how realistic is this, and can you tell it's not human, and it's getting closer. So we're sort of assuming that AI will not provide better service, right? Now we know it's going to get better, but what the calculus, the cost associated with providing that service is dropping precipitously. And so it annoys, we've all been through it. You've been through some experience with a particular product and you're like, you couldn't just populate that field for me. You couldn't just, like, come on guys, was it that hard? And you see that, like, in my world, in product world, you see that laziness. I think of it as laziness, but really what it is, it's, I've got 100 things to do. I just can't get to that one thing to make that experience that little bit better. And we've all been through the flip side where you're like, oh my God, this is great. I didn't have to do anything. And that's because that's going back to craftsmanship, right? That used to be the Apple experience, right? You used to go and go, oh my God, this is so amazing. I wonder if the cost to make those incremental small things is just so much lower that I think, will we ultimately end up with a higher level of experience as well as service?
Well,
So
yeah.
I
And
guess.
I think one thing that happened during the internet age, to go on like a tangent, was that there were some companies who could put an enormous amount of care into those experiences. Like, say, the original Siri, and they bought SRI, Apple did, and they
Yeah.
released Siri, and it was actually incredible in like 2012. It was kind of like, oh, this is the future. We're going to be just talking to the AI, and it kind of got to the point like, it's not that useful. And that was kind of maybe the AI. You had this AI surge of you can talk to a computer. And then you had this kind of valley or trough of despair. That thing is, Siri never got better. in, in 13 or 14 years, as far as you can perceive. I'm sure it's way, way better in a lot of ways, but it wasn't like that huge jump that you got from ChatGPT. And I think one thing that happened is it took so much effort to create those crafted experiences and to maintain them that actually, the number of people at Google who invented Google Maps in 2005 was like, I mean, it's Brett Taylor and like 7 guys, people. Now there's probably 10,000 people who work on Google Maps. It's not that much better. It's certainly better, but it's not that much better. And so if you can release a product with huge amounts of care, but then to maintain it takes 10,000 people instead of 10. Yeah, everyone's worried about all of our jobs going away, but I think what we stalled out as an industry in a lot of ways. In a lot of the places we expected things to get continuously better, they stopped getting better. Apple is a great example. They haven't done anything new in a while. The earbuds are great. You have them. I have them. I don't use them with my computer because they don't connect to Macs very well, and they always disconnect. And I don't want to do that during a podcast. But that's just another thing. Like the connectivity like there's so many little things about Apple that you've started to feel them getting very old because they couldn't just go finish the last 5% on a lot of their products.
Yeah, well, because what they used to do is a very narrow set of products.
And small teams.
Yeah, small teams, they could focus on, the 4 or 5 products they had. And then let's mention the bean counters. The bean counters rolled in again and said, we could make a lot more money if we had more products, which was the trade-off that Jobs presumably had already decided he didn't want to make. Well, anyway, the calculus of all of that, I think, is going to change.
The bean counters at Apple and Google did a great job.
They did. They did.
The
people of Ireland thank them.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why Irish GDP per capita is $400,000.
Yeah, there you go.
Good job.
All right. So let's land this one. Usual question. I don't know if I have an answer if you don't, which is what have you seen in the last week or so that piqued your interest or got you excited?
I think my experience was at home. My wife, Claire, and she'll never listen to it. She's like, I hear enough of you. So she won't make it to the end of this episode, hopefully. But she had a project that at her work, somebody was they were going to hire some undergrads to just do some data entry. And it was going to be like a 3-month summer project. And she's like, I think this could be done by ChatGPT. And so she tried it at work and she just, doesn't have the paid ChatGPT I do. And so she's like, this doesn't work. And so she sent it to me. She's like, run it on the paid ChatGPT. And I did it and it perfectly performed. I used O3 and O3 wrote like a script. It did all this stuff. And what I realized is that the paid version of ChatGPT is far more performant than the unpaid version. And I've had the paid version for a year. I canceled it once and then I started using the unpaid version. I was like, this is terrible. I went back to paid. And now I'm thinking I should pay for the $200 a month version, like the Super Pro Max that they have for Claude and ChatGPT, just because the realm of capability this was a problem that was probably going to be, $2,000-$3,000 a month intern at some school, and is now going to be. It was done in an afternoon for a fraction of the $20 I paid for ChatGPT, and so I think that's probably something that is not apparent to me before. Is that there's probably a lot of people who don't get how good it is because they haven't used. Now, the thing is, ChatGPT is probably losing $200 a month on me easily because I use it for all kinds of nonsense. But if not $1,000 a month, I mean, they just raised $30 billion. They're incinerating cash. But I think a lot of people don't realize what you could get. And this is probably a $5,000 or $6,000 problem that was solved in an afternoon.
Yeah, we need to continue to. As founders of AI-centric businesses, we need to continue to thank them for incinerating that money. Not only do we get to use the service, but possibly more importantly, they're educating everybody for us, which is let them keep doing that, please.
They're doing tons of education. They're putting gigantic amounts of research in. And actually, most of the value of this I see is going to be gained by startups. You had Windsurf that was acquired for $3 billion last couple of weeks. ChatGPT. I think there's so many applications to this and people are ready to buy. I don't know. Go start an AI company, everybody.
Yeah.
Just go start one. If you can do it.
I'm going to give you my thing for the week.
Yes, please.
I harp on about it a lot, image generation. But last week, somewhat quietly, ChatGPT released the API for the image generation, the latest version. And for those who aren't totally up to speed, I think this is available on the free ChatGPT account. Go try their latest image generation. It is really, really awesome. Now, the
The API,
reason
or can you use the 4.0?
you can you up until now you could only use it, on the UI as a human on the browser.
Hmm.
Now it's just been opened via the API. I predict you're going to see an explosion of a bunch of different interesting businesses just based off the back of this. We're also going to see some challenges too. We tend to take, for the most part, images as oh, that one's photoshopped, right?
Hmm.
We're not that far away from, if you played with Sora or any of the other video generation stuff, we're not far away from that being absolutely awesome. And if you think about all the places that we use video as truth, that's going to change. So that's maybe a downside, but more positively, that image generation via API opens up a huge amount of scalable, systematic type of problems that we have today that can be solved. So I think we're going to see some super exciting stuff.
I'm waiting for really good video games because I have been building as a side project for many years, and which is to say I'm very bad at it. But like open world board games, like so that there's like an infinite board. 13, 14 years I've been playing with it. I always have like work come in the way and I never can finish my projects. But the idea that you can automatically generate content and images for video games, no one's built a game that has yet taken advantage of that. So that would be another thing, is I think there could be really, really cool and compelling video game worlds. You've seen some demos, but nothing's really hit yet. Nothing is really that takes advantage of it in a deep way.
We should talk a little bit more about that. What are the inputs needed to make that happen?
Well, the problem is most video games are designed to be closed. So you have a start and an end to the video game. Either it's a start of a campaign, or if it's like StarCraft, you have like a start of an event, and then you end the game like 20 minutes later. And that just puts all kinds of constraints, but it limits the amount of content that's necessary to generate to facilitate that game. And I think there's no limit to, like, you could create infinite characters and evolve those characters' lives. You ever heard of a game called Dwarf Fortress?
I have not.
Man, all right. Well, that's a deep hole to go down, pun intended. But basically, it's this infinitely, it just generates dwarf characters. Problem is, they were all like weird ASCII, so you had to interpret what the little various ASCII characters meant. That's a cat. Didn't look like a cat. It was just like an asterisk or something. And so that's what I want out of the metaverse. I don't want something that is a representation of reality. I want something that creates new worlds and allows you to play a video game where you can invest huge amounts of time and energy and storytelling into it, and it actually contains and represents that. And the problem is with every game, if it lasts, Settlers of Catan, you build your country, but it's only on a set of squares, and then it ends after an hour. Like you could build versions of those games that persist infinitely, or like Fortnite, where you have hundreds of people interacting in a common space. I don't think we've hit. It's shocking to me that no one's ever built a hit game, and I think that's coming in the next few months.
So infinite scroll for video games.
Yeah. You start a
Okay.
game and it never ends,
Never
versus
ends.
you play every 25 minutes. It just doesn't make sense to me. It seems like there's so much more value to holding those users in that world indefinitely, and not just every 6 months we release another set of playable characters. It's like, no, infinite all the time. You just dive into the world and never come up.
They have not quite that, but in the driving simulator driver video game where they have free driving, which is this notion of it's not infinite, but it's meant to feel infinite. But they spend a
Mhm.
lot of time generating the content. So, all right, let's talk about that in a future episode. For now,
All right.
okay, thanks, Matt. Talk
See
next
ya.
week. Bye now.